Hi, this is Leadership 6323, a proactive versus reactive approach for specific organizations. So, the purpose of this is to highlight two specific scenarios in which leadership approaches are utilized to counter for a crisis situation. And then I'm going to highlight the details for the proactive versus reactive approach to each crisis, and then ultimately decide which is a little bit more productive, proactive versus reactive, related to the specific scenarios. So the first one has to do with Michigan State University and their team doctor, Larry Nassar, which is an osteopathic doctor. He was also the Team USA gymnastics team doctor. He was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison due to sexual harassment charges, which there was actually 156 total victims over a 30-year career. And then he was also charged with 60 years in prison on child pornography charges. And just to update this, Michigan State recently, a couple days ago, paid out $500 million to their victims, 475 to current victims, and 75 set aside for future potential victims as well. As far as the timeline, so here's the keys here. 1998, Michigan State female student athlete complained about sexual harassment. Michigan State took no action. In 2000, a second Michigan State student athlete complained, no action as well. 16 years later, after the first complaint, 2014, there was a small investigation conducted by Michigan State, and they cleared Nassar of any wrongdoing, so he kept working. Now, 2 years later, he was fired immediately, relieved of his clinical duties, because the Team USA investigation came out into the news and was published as far as a criminal report. Again, as far as this reactive approach, employees were relieved of duty, which they should have been, pretty immediate. So the couple that I highlighted here, the president, Lou Anna Simon, immediately after his sentencing, she resigned. 2 days later, the athletic director, Mark Hollis, also resigned 2 days later after President Simon was gone. And then part of this scandal was a lady named Kathy Kledges. She was a Michigan State's gymnastic coach for 27 years, and she encouraged two of her student athletes to not file sexual assault charges during her tenure with Larry Nassar. Now, as far as the connection to literature with this reactive approach, I found that leaders who enable organizations to react positively and recover from crisis exhibit the following things. Signal detection. Michigan State failed in this because they did not, 1998, 2000, they did not utilize the complaints from these two student athletes for sexual assault. Didn't do anything about that. Preparation and prevention. They did not conduct the investigation until 16 years later. That's not going to prevent anything. Damage control. They fired Nassar. They fired specific officials, which is what should have happened. Their recovery. That's to be determined. We don't know yet. And then reflection is, $500 million lost, not to mention the respect and integrity of the university because of how they handled this in a reactive way. Now, transformational leadership, I found may cause a disruption to regular routine. So the study suggests the amount of remedial steps a company has practiced and the swiftness, how quick they react and implement, is directly related to limiting and fixing a crisis. So Michigan State failed to implement an investigatory team in 98 and 2000 when the complaints came out. No action was taken, and therefore he was cleared of any wrongdoing. So I'd say they failed in that reactive approach because nothing was done proactively ahead of time. Now, the second scenario, this has to do with the firing of head football coach Rich Rodriguez at the University of Arizona. So he was fired in early 2018. There was a $7.5 million notice of claim for sexual harassment and workplace misconduct. Now, this came from his longtime administrative assistant, Melissa Wilhelmsen. Rodriguez allegedly asked her to cover up an affair and consistently... Okay, so another key here was Rodriguez was fired without cause, which allowed him to collect $6.28 million in his contract buyout. I'll come back to that. Okay, so from a proactive response here, in July, Wilhelmsen had left her administrative job for another local position. In October, the Office of Institutional Equity conducted an investigation into Rodriguez's alleged mistreatment of players, but also workplace misconduct, which was promoted by UA's athletic department. That was big. So what the Institutional Integrity, what their organization does is to uphold non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies to make sure equality is experienced by all members of the university community. Now, as far as connection to literature here, A study focused on crisis response found that crisis leadership and immediate communication were the most effective remedies, which is kind of what they did with the Office of Institutional Integrity. And the crisis response was already set up proactively to remedy these types of scenarios. Now, another study focused on organizations' reputation and their crisis response and leadership visibility resulted in the best stakeholder attitude. So the athletic department, the athletic director, the president, the board of directors all immediately called for this investigation. And they fired him quickly because of what they found. And they felt that giving him the buyout, the $6.28 million in that buyout, was less important. It was more important to show the academic community, the UA community, that anti-harassment policies were going to be put up into play, and this is not acceptable. So ultimately, which is more productive? So reactively, Michigan State, they conducted their investigation 16 years after the first accusation. That's not going to work. Now, they did fire and relieve their top-ranking officials after the fact. Proactively, UA, so Arizona, immediately used their Office of Institutional Equity to promote this investigation, found what they found, and 2 months later, they ended up firing the coach. They fired him even without cause, gave him millions of dollars because they wanted to uphold their integrity as a university. Ultimately, here's my sources, my references that I decided to use. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. I'm going to shut it down. Take care.